state basis. And it's something we are looking at. Actually, in Arizona, there's a bill hopefully will pass in the next day or two. That's actually the NRA supports that actually helps get more records like this into the background check system. We've made a lot of progress, got millions more since the years of Virginia Tech, but we still have more progress to go. And then when we make that progress and we have all the records in this system, if we still allow people to completely avoid it and buy a gun totally unchecked, my question is, what's the point? Why did we do all this work to begin with? I think background checks should be something standard. So many times I've heard, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, if you agree with that, then you ought to believe that we should check the people who fired the guns in the first place. Like I said, I thought this was something that we took care of, and we did already. And I knew that there was a way via gun shows, via the internet, via newspaper ads, via Facebook. I mean, there are many ways to buy a gun unchecked, and it's legal in this country. I think it's the policy that got us a vote in the United States Senate last year, and I know that all the stories or the bill failed, but actually if you look at the breakdown, we had 55 senators vote for the background check bill. That's a majority in most democracies. We didn't break the filibuster, so the bill didn't go on to the House. And today, in the House, so that bill does exist by itself, and that bill has 190 co-sponsors on the background check bill. That's more co-sponsors than there has ever been on any piece of good gun policy, in my opinion, ever. Even more than when Jim and Sarah Brady set up the background check system in the early 90s to begin with. They only had like 150 co-sponsors when they got their vote. We have 190. We just have to go from 190 to 218. That's a world of 30 votes, which is certainly doable. And I encourage you guys to figure out where your members stand who represent you here and represent you guys back at home. This is important stuff to know. Background checks, surprised that we only started doing them in this country, again, on only some gun sales in 1993 with the passage of the Brady bill. Before that, when you went to a gun store, you were asked to fill out a piece of paper with your name, basic information, and then you have to answer a series of questions like, do you have a felony record? And you're supposed to check a box, yes or no. Do you have a domestic violence restraining order against you? Check a box, yes or no. History of mental illness, so on and so forth. And once you checked all those boxes, you handed it back over to the salesman, and they would look and make sure all no's were checked. If all no's were checked, they handed you the gun, you paid the money, and you were away. It was actually called a really easy way to avoid your record coming up, and that was just lying on a form before that. And we didn't actually know if you were telling the truth until the Brady bill, and we started doing these background checks. Like again, 1993, and only on some gun sales, the sales from gun dealers, not from everybody else. And since we started doing these checks, over 2 million transactions have been blocked for people who have either a felony record, domestic violence restraining order, diagnosed mental illness, etc. 2 million in this year is huge. And I think 200 in that same period of time would be effective, because we've seen what happens when one person who shouldn't have a gun gets their hands on a gun. But 2 million means the system is working. I'm saying it's not perfect. We can make it better with the records in the system, getting all of them in there, and then applying the system across the board. It's the one issue I think most Americans get, like I said. It's the one issue that I think will have the biggest impact of keeping a gun away from a dangerous person to begin with. Certainly, there's the argument say, well, people will do everything that they're going to do. Well, I agree with that, but we have to make it difficult. We should not make it easy. And background checks is one impediment, one hurdle to make it difficult for a dangerous person and a gun to come together in the first place. So, long answer to the question. But two more points. Mental health and school safety. These are two other issues, like I said, I became much more aware of after the shooting, and actually have a lot more progress than in terms of gun policy, in my opinion, since the shooting at Virginia Tech. Your behavior threat assessment team, these threat assessment teams, as I understand, was not in place before 2007. Around that time? What I'm trying to say is Virginia Tech really changed the game when it comes to how schools handle threat assessment and how schools monitor and help students who are in need of help. Things like, well, actually, it's kind of alarming to see the doors on the back of this room here. Those doors, in such a way, were chained up from the inside in our building. Schools did things as flush-mounted push handles, so you can't chain doors like that up. We have now emergency alert system in each classroom that relays a message. It took the school almost 2 hours to send an alert to the student body that there was a shooting in the dormitory of a dead student and a dying student. 2 hours is not a sufficient time. That was way too long. talk about one thing that could have altered a series of events. A timely message of information would have drastically altered that. In terms of mental health, which is another issue that's often talked about this, it's not as if we don't know necessarily what to do in terms of mental health. It's quite often a lack of funding. We just don't support it like we should. We don't give that money to the associations and the organizations that do that work and help them get the word out that there are services there for people. Particularly when it comes to tough economic times and states are looking to cut budgets, mental health services is one of the areas that gets first cut. I know that Virginia, where my family lives now, actually spends less on mental health services now than it did in 2007. So, that's really comes to, we want to deal with this, all right, let's fund this properly and let's get the money to people who can offer help to people who really need it. I want to be sure to say that.
I want to follow up on this issue of mental health, and when we think about, we'll come back to Purdue for a second, when we think about how resources are allocated at Purdue, I want to ask Rob and Chief Cox about how you see the balance of resources towards security kinds of issues versus mental health issues. And if you comment on the balance, whether we're striking it right, whether we need to do different things, that'd be helpful.
Well, I first want to say that most mental ill people aren't violent, and I think we really need to remember that. It just so happens that, well, if there's a mass shooting, is that person really mentally ill or not mentally ill? And that's hard to determine, but we do have to remember that. I think that's very important. As far as striking a balance, I think we're striking a better balance than we were during Virginia Tech. I think all of our silos are communicating with each other, with students of concern much more readily. We see the benefit of sharing information, and hopefully then in the students' interest get them the help that they need. But we can only do that, and we've been shown to do that by communicating with each other, because one area like the residence halls, they have something going on with a student, but other departments may never hear about it. Well, that's not the case anymore. We really have a wonderful communication system with our students of concern.
Yeah, to the striking the balance comment, I think the university does a nice job, and then we will always look for ways to improve. Rob mentioned a couple of the processes that we have in place, and even for years now we have looked to improve the reporting processes. The university has its whistleblower hotline. The Maxine system is out there for hate and bias. The Maxine system we use off the student's office website to report suspicious behavior or crimes or things like that. The behavioral intervention team functions very well, and we meet weekly. It's a cross-discipline team that is very effective. It's not a team that gets together to discuss what they need to do and have another meeting. It's a team that gets together to discuss what needs to be done and action is taken. So I think that our university here is very proactive and is also always open and looking for ways to better the processes that we have currently in place.
Let's open it up and get some comments from the audience.
Well, I come down to
Sorry, we have one mic.
It's okay. I can project. Thank you, sir.
Professor Clausen, my first question is for you. You mentioned 2 shootings at Purdue, but you would agree that there have been far more murders involving non-firearms at Purdue, correct? Knifings, hammers, people thrown off parking garages, what?
Yeah, I don't have all the statistics, and
there have been murders other than firearms here at Purdue, a lot more, in fact, correct?
I'm sure there have been many deaths at Purdue, and I think each one is tragic, and we should think very carefully about how we approach any of these safety issues.
So you'd agree that violence comes from not just the object, but the person and the person's intent, correct?
Violence.
If you have murders involving hammers, gravity, and knives, then they're still murders, correct?
Yeah, I think the issue is that any kind of death and murder, really is not.
Will this seminar symposium address those murders as well?
Why don't you ask the chief of police?
Okay.
He
Chief,
probably knows the answer to your
Chief,
question.
this seminar, are they going to be addressed, the knifings, the murders by gravity, the murder by hammer? We can have any input on that?
I actually think, my understanding is that the discussion was on.
Just on guns? Oh, okay. Okay, but you'd agree that there have been murders other than firearms here at Purdue, correct?
I would say that.
You were investigating some of them, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The majority of the deaths that we have in and around our campus typically are not murders. As a matter of fact, we have had the one that you referred to in 96 in Wiley Hall. We've had this one, and then we had an employee that was shot to death down at Freeman Hall a few years before that. Those are the three that I'm.
And as well as the hammer murders, you were involved in that, correct?
We've got it now.
Chief Cox, also you stated that that Purdue, I guess it's one of your concerns, the reason you're against students exercising their civil right to carry firearms would be that you would be mistaken, if somehow students would be mistaken for people that commit crimes. Is that correct?
One of my biggest, and so to be able to answer that question, one of my biggest concerns is absolutely officers responding to shots fired or shooting inside of a facility here on campus.
How do you train for that off campus?
Several students, and walking into a facility where you've got more than one handgun pointed, not knowing, because you don't know who is the threat and who are the students who are trying to defend themselves. And what I really wouldn't want to happen is that a student be injured or killed. That is something that is problematic in my opinion.
How do you train for that off campus? Because Purdue has statewide
One more
jurisdiction.
question, sir, and then we are going to move to other people who want to ask questions.
Okay, after this one then.
But, yeah.
Purdue has statewide jurisdiction, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, how do you train for that scenario off campus?
We train the same way for that scenario in any, it wouldn't matter whether it was here on.
So it wouldn't matter whether it's off campus or on campus, the training for you is the same, correct? Mr. Goddard, you said,
Sit down.
I got one more question. I was told I had one more question. I said after this one. Am I allowed another question?
Sit down.
Okay, I'll come back.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
I think we had a question back here.
I just wanted to know who that person was. You all extended it to us the courtesy of knowing who you were and how you fit into the discussion. And I would like to know who you are, please.
Private citizen, my name is Freeman. I'm from Lafayette, Indiana.
And are you a member of the NRA?
Yes, I am.
I figured.
Let's see if
Thank
there's
you.
other questions from the audience. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Nina Kirkpatrick. I live in West Lafayette. I graduated from Purdue University in 1964. Is there any prohibition of guns in Purdue University buildings currently?
Yes, ma'am. Our facilities use policy prohibits that.
And does everybody, if we went out on the campus walk, the Hello Walk, and we stopped students and asked them, how many students would know that? What percentage of students know that there are no guns allowed in Purdue University buildings?
I would say that there are several more now than there were prior to January, but I don't know the exact number, but with all the training that has gone on with Director Ron Wright and our emergency planning, and the probable would be that knowledge base is probably increasing.
What kind of, do you have any kind of a major campaign against gun violence on campus? I mean, where there's lots of communication and lots of written material, billboards, and things on the Purdue sign, back of Stewart Hall. I mean, how often is this kind of talk carried on here? Because it seems to me that we live in a gun culture now, and one of the things that it's important to do is to change that gun culture so that people know, like I'm telling everybody in this office, that I think it's inappropriate to have guns and to carry guns, that, but anyway, okay, that's my laugh. I'm not going to say anymore.
Is there a major campaign plan? I know that the police department and everybody on campus has tried to do so much education since, but is there any kind of planned campaign on down the line?
Our push is the public safety piece, is the see something, say something. The alert system that we have, it's more about public safety, not specifically. I mean, it could be a crime of violence, it could be a crime of domestic battery. I mean, we're concerned that we cover the whole gamut of public safety issues.
There's another question here.
Good evening. I'm Tom McConville. I live in Lafayette. I asked my state representative, Sheila Klinker, a while back how she voted on the bill that would allow guns to be in school parking lots in the state of Indiana. And I was appalled and surprised to find out that she voted for it. And I asked her why. And she said, well, because somebody had been caught with a gun in a parking lot. And they were evidently unaware of the law that said you can't have guns in school parking lots. And so the wizards down in Indianapolis decided that it would be a good thing to have guns in the parking lots. More guns in more places does not solve this problem. A very good example is in Australia after the massacre at Port Arthur. They basically told the people, if you hunt, if you are a gun collector, or you're a farmer that needs to shoot varmints, you can have your guns. And when you go to get the permit for those guns, you will show us the safe that you are going to keep them locked up in. After that, the number of murders was cut in half, the number of suicides that was cut in half, and they have not had a mass shooting since. So there is a good example of what works. What we're talking about here is a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but if you really want to improve the problem, go see what they did in Australia.
Did you have a question, the panel?
I just wanted to state that. Thanks.
I think there's a question back here.
Hi, excuse my voice, I'm kind of dealing with allergies. I'm a staff member here at Purdue, and my question is this. What is a criminal? And I want a serious answer from all of you. What is a criminal?
A person who commits a crime.
It means someone who doesn't follow the laws. Who doesn't follow the rules that society has put down. Correct? Am I?
Yes, you're correct.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I originally grew up in Chicago. I'm actually a survivor of domestic violence, where I was attacked with my son in the backseat of another car. Why should I not be allowed to defend myself and my son, no matter where I'm at?
I'm saying you can't.
I think what he's getting at is in gun-restricted areas, criminals will not follow a law regardless of what law is in effect in a particular area. That's what defines a criminal, as we just figured out. So with that being said, how are creating laws or areas where a particular anything is not legal versus is legal really going to solve any of that problem moving forward?
I understand the point here.
Can you hear without the mic?
Yeah.
You can
It's an interesting line of thinking, I think, generally, because that would really raise the question as to why do we have any laws against anything?
True.
Why do we have laws against murder? We should get rid of those. People don't follow that. Why should we have stop signs, traffic lights? It's a difficult road to go down if that's truly the belief at the end of it. Sir, I understand where you're coming from. In a situation like that, I've thought of how this day would have panned out a million different ways. It's a natural part of the process. From me saving the day and being the hero and shooting him to me doing something and getting shot and getting killed myself. And I try to think back to what I was going through that morning, what I understood, and I just realized that I didn't know what was happening. I was shot before I even understood the situation I was in. And I know that it's not for me to dictate for everybody else. But what I'm trying to say is that the solution here of introducing guns in college campuses is no guarantee of this is going to help situations. In fact, it could make some situations a lot worse. And often,
There's a guarantee of safety anyway.
Correct, right. So we have to think about just everyday college life as opposed to these very actually highly unlikely incidents of shootings on college campuses. The majority of college students and people age of that college students range are victimized off campus. The homicide rate for college age students is much higher not on college campuses than it is on college campus. I think it's a large part of the fact that firearms are not present in that environment. But look, I understand the point. I think ultimately, right, this is a choice that the schools should make themselves. Whether or not it's the student council, or it's not the government, or it's not the president of the university, it's not something that should be mandated to them. And I actually was reading up a lot on Indiana before I came here, and learned that actually there is no training requirement to get your concealed carry permit in the state. There's actually no live fire, no situational training. I understand the point here, but it really makes me difficult to take the whole argument for advocating on campus seriously when there is zero training required to do so. I think this would be a very different conversation if that wasn't the case.
What about the training required to beat someone to death on the fish?
I don't know what to say. Look,
I see two sides of training. One, some states require training, some don't. Of course, like you said, the state is one that doesn't. However, as far as specifically to a campus setting, I would be willing to make a copy of my carry license with the Purdue Police Department and even go through a class on campus with Purdue's Police Department to have them say, you're okay here on this campus. If a measure like that were to happen, I could see that. I would be willing to follow through with that. And then similarly from the other side where you're saying murders that happen on campus versus off campus due to the presence of firearms and the differences in the figures there, sort of tied with what this gentleman said earlier about Australia. There are some towns here in this country that have mandated that every home have a firearm. And if you see reports from those communities and stuff, people talk about, yes, it's very odd at first. People sort of freak out a bit at first because it is a culture that not everyone is accustomed to. But at the end of the day, they talk about the crimes in those particular towns are reduced to near zero. People talk about leaving their houses unlocked, and I think it gets a little exaggerated. But if you're in a situation where you understand that any and or everyone around you could also be carrying a firearm, that's like trying to rob a gun store. You're just not going to do it because it's beyond any logical comprehension of just being.
So the point of the one moment, right? Careful with that. I double check that. But
I wonder if John wanted to respond. She probably wants to respond to just kind of the notion of the policies that are appropriate for a university community.
Sure. And as I often, when we have some of these discussions, because we're a public institution, because we we open our arms to students and staff and faculty and visitors from all over the world, we will experience those random acts of violence. We live in society, and it's It's an unfortunate part of society, but we do that. And I think what we have to do, it goes back to what I said a little bit earlier, is we have to take a look at the population that we serve here on campus. And we have to try to employ a little bit of common sense in there and take a look at the majority of the people that are here on campus are 18 to 20 something in general, with very well educated, but come from all different walks of life, all different parts of the world. There's very different rules from all over, and so I go back to looking at statistics, which is what we do a lot, and to take a look at the fact that our and I've got them on here, but I believe it was in our 11-12 school year, we had 3 weapons violations on campus. That year we had 343 theft cases. We need to focus our attention and take a look at some of those things. The following school year we didn't have any weapons violations, and our theft cases were still, and so I don't know that there's a perfect answer to this. What I do know is that you need to take a look at the dynamics of the community. You need to take a look at statistically at what the major issues are. And if you shift some of that, for example, and allow, as the gentleman in the back and some of the folks in here have said, to carry a handgun or a weapon with you everywhere you go, how does that begin to change the dynamics of the community that you live in, and what's going to happen to those statistics? If you've got to believe that in some cases, some of those thefts would involve weapons. Students that set things down and forget them. Students that leave them, it's not to say that there's it's going to happen because of just the dynamic of the population that we serve.
Just like to add a few, to your point in the back, sir. You said if everyone had to go, nobody would rob a store or something, right? So, if an armed society is a polite society, I think is the other bumper sticker with that kind of idea. And my question there is that, so if you follow that logic out to, looking at the bigger picture, then the countries with the highest rates of gun ownership per capita should have the lowest rates of gun homicide and gun suicide. And actually, when you look at that, America is actually the #1 country per capita in gross, and we have one of the biggest problems of gun homicide and gun suicide. So it doesn't seem to follow through when you look at it the big picture.
88 million responsible gun owners committed no crimes today or yesterday or the day before.
Right. There's many responsible gun owners. And I think responsible gun ownership here is the key. We should be looking at how do we reduce violent crime with firearms in every means, but particularly firearms. And this issue, not just on college campuses, but how do we reduce it generally in our country? And so things like background checks not just make college students safer, but it makes people safer everywhere we go. It's like I said, this is to look at just a small campus world is to not do this bigger problem justice, and to actually step back and look at how do we do this and keep people safe when they go home, when they're not in school. That's how we're going to achieve saving lives on a greater scale than just looking at a small little location. So, sure.
I think for me, and here I am an outsider, but who has been in the country for a while, I think it's important also to understand not only how a person who does not have a gun feel, but also the environment around. I would certainly feel threatened if I saw somebody wearing a gun in my classroom, whether he's a student or if I had a teacher, because I feel like, and I'm sure maybe there is research that supports that people's behavior change when they see a gun, when they hold a gun, or so I think it's also important not only to look at individual rights, but to look at collective rights of other people and how they feel in an environment where there is no gun. So I just wanted to read that.
My name is Jenny Freeman, and I wanted to ask you about, I think the lady mentioned that there's no guns allowed in Purdue buildings. What about the campus itself, outside, outdoors?
My understanding is that it's also not allowed, but as recent as a few years ago, a faculty member told me that was allowed everywhere. So even the faculty at the university may or may not know the regulations.
Sure, absolutely. And education about, university policy, state laws, and having a good basic understanding is always going to be important. And I think that with an institution our size, we try very hard to put I know that our Office of Institutional Equity worked very hard to make our university policies website something that's more user friendly. I think we can always improve. I do. The question that you asked was that there's no firearms, explosives, or anything allowed anywhere on the university property. Whether that's in a building, whether that's on the front lawn of Street Hall, whether that's out of the fountain, up by Hubby, wherever it might be. Now that's the university property. That's where that policy is in effect. And in those situations, what happens is that if that's discovered, we simply confiscate the weapon before the individual off campus and return the firearms to them, and then educate them on the policy so they know not to bring the weapon back on campus, because you're in the city, the county, or wherever, and you have a proper paperwork to carry that weapon, and that's not a problem. So I would agree that education is always number one. That's what we're all about, is educating, education and humanity, and I think that goes internally for processes as well as externally.
What about the streets that go through campus? Are they considered part of campus, and sidewalks that go through?
The streets are city streets. There are some university streets, but for example, that's something that I'll be fair, officers are tuned into. For example, if it's out it's not 26 anymore, but it's State Street, and we find a weapon in a vehicle on a traffic stop, and it's not confiscated as evidence or anything as part of the crime. The officers just remind them about the university policy. You know what? Have a great day. Just remember, you can't have it on campus property, and they're allowed to move on down the road. So it really is about that balance and making sure that we try to treat people fairly and equitably across the board, and ensure that we educate them while we're doing that.
How does that impact with part of Purdue being annexed by West Lafayette?
There's still, the university is still very clear. The MOU and everything, we still have universities in ground property. What the city does now is, for example, like what we used to call State Road 26, that would have been a state highway, that's now a city street. But 3rd Street, Gischke Drive, Dave Ross Road, all those are still university owned and controlled streets. And we actually have a map that was developed, for example, snow plowing. It shows which streets are university, which streets are city. And so it has had some effect, because now the city is now on the left side of this as well, with 231 and all that out there. So but we're very aware of the boundaries.
Going back to that gentleman's point on actually carrying in a campus, what about all of these states that have allowed campus carry? If you have the right permit and all of the right things, reporting statistically less rapes, less crimes, less theft, why would that not be considered?
That's a good conversation, and I think that will play out here as time passes. You can't, whether it's like the state of Georgia just had some changes in their gun laws, or other states where those institutions are maybe in the city, or maybe part of the community in the county. I think that you can't look at that in like a one-year snapshot. I think just like we do, in our clarity reporting, we report over a 4-year window, so that you as a parent, when you start taking a look on these days to send your child to college, you get an opportunity to see what those crime statistics are, not just what it was last year, but what over a 4-year reporting period. So I think it's important to pay attention to those statistics, and I also think there's regional differences too. You go to the Southwest, it's a very different climate. You come to the Midwest, it's different. You go to the East Coast, it's different. And so I think that those are all things that need to be taken into account when you start taking a look at weapons on campus.
You mentioned clarity reporting. Some folks may not be familiar with that.
Yeah, sure,
Just say a few words
absolutely.
about that.
The university is, all universities, colleges are required by federal law, by the Department of Education, to report UCR Part 1 crimes and then other things such as alcohol violations, drug violations, and things like that. And it's a very comprehensive report. It takes a lot of effort to put together. It's guided by the DOE. And sometimes we just came out of a rulemaking committee. Some of you may be aware there's a new, they're working on the VAWA law, the Violence Against Women Act. And that will have a direct impact on your university, police departments, and security departments. It will increase our reporting efforts, and it will really, we'll have to partner with some of our campus partners to make sure we're getting all these statistics from all of our, what we call our CSAs or campus security authorities. That would be anybody that has any sort of reporting structure with students. If you have it, if you get a better understanding about that, you can always just go Google the Gene Cleary Act, or just take a look at our website. We've got a direct link to it, and you can look at our report there as well.
And under the Gene Cleary Act, you're also supposed to notify your student body, the general population, in a timely fashion, I believe. Timely fashion as to crimes that occur on campus. And 2 hours for Virginia Tech to notify the shooting in the dormitory in 2007 is what the lawsuit was that was generated after the shooting, claiming that it failed the Cleary Act, failed to inform in a timely fashion, and it's still going back and forth with litigation on that. So.
You guys have been very patient.
Well, thank you for hosting this forum. I'm Steven. I'm a Purdue student. I'm a junior. It almost seems to me that in our culture, we have a real breakdown of respect and discipline that goes on. I grew up in a household of firearms. I shot my first firearm when I was 5 years old. First thing my father ever did was he told me, Steven, always treat a gun like it's loaded. Don't point it at anything unless you mean to shoot it. Treat it with respect. Don't be one of these people that goes around and shoots people. And when I look at it as society, I remember very vividly, I took, funny story, I took my ex-girlfriend to the local shooting range. And she's just waving all over the place. And I'm just like, you said you shot a gun before, right? And she's like, yeah, I shot a gun before. I'm like, you're not supposed to do that. Don't point at stuff like that. And I know, I'm sorry guys, I'm really bad at public speaking. Alright, COM 114 does not prepare you for these kinds of situations. So, let this be on the record, COM 114, please improve your curriculum. But really, I see it more as a respect issue and a discipline, because in our society, we have people